Rain pounded the tin roof as Jake wiped grease from his hands and stepped onto the front porch. It was late, and the storm had rolled in fast. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and pine. He was about to lock up for the night when he noticed movement at the end of his walkway, a figure hunched over, pushing something through the rain. His eyes narrowed. It was a woman in a wheelchair, struggling to move forward, soaked from head to toe. Draped over her lap were two little girls, twins, maybe 5 years old, clinging to each other under a damp blanket. Their cheeks were red from the cold, and their small eyes darted around, frightened and exhausted. Jake's instincts kicked in. He rushed down the steps and met them halfway, crouching beside the woman. Her lips trembled, not just from the cold, but from fear. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "We just needed somewhere to rest. We won't stay long." Jake looked at the girls, shivering and silent, their tiny hands gripping the sides of the wheelchair. Then he looked at the woman, her eyes swollen, not from the rain, but from days of holding back tears. "You're not going anywhere tonight," Jake said softly. "Come inside." She hesitated. "We don't have anything." "You don't need anything," he replied, already lifting one of the girls into his arms. Inside, he helped dry them off, offered them fresh clothes from his son Ethan's old pile, and laid blankets out in the living room. The heater groaned to life, filling the space with welcome warmth. The twins huddled together on the couch, their eyes slowly closing as the heat thawed their tiny bodies. Jake made hot cocoa with the last of the milk, and handed a mug to the woman. She accepted it with shaky hands, her eyes never quite meeting his. "I'm Jake," he said gently. "Lena," she replied. "And these are Mia and Leela." Jake nodded. "Well, Lena, you and the girls are safe here." She opened her mouth to respond, but emotion caught in her throat. Instead, she just nodded, blinking back tears. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, she felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. Jake's house slowly became more than just a roof. Over their heads, it became a place where healing quietly unfolded. It started with small things. Lena would wake before everyone else and make pancakes with shaky hands, refusing to let her wheelchair keep her from doing her part. She insisted on folding laundry and helping Ethan with his schoolwork. Jake offered to do it all himself, but she gently declined. "I may not walk," she told him once, "but I'm still a mother." The twins, Mia and Lila, adjusted quickly. They followed Ethan everywhere, giggling as they chased him through the backyard or colored pictures at the kitchen table. Jake watched them from the garage window during his breaks, smiling at how naturally they all got along. Ethan had been quiet since his mom passed away, but now, with the girls around, he was laughing again. Evenings were filled with warmth that couldn't be measured by money. They played board games on the floor, shared meals crowded around the table, and watched old cartoons cuddled on the couch. Sometimes Lena would read bedtime stories, her voice soft and soothing, and the children would drift off before she finished the last page. Jake would stand in the hallway, listening, feeling something deep in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Peace. One night, after the kids were asleep, Lena sat in the dimly lit kitchen sipping tea. Jake joined her, wiping his hands on a towel. The silence between them was easy now. "You didn't have to take us in," Lena said quietly, staring into her cup. "We were strangers." Jake shook his head. "You weren't strangers. You were a mom with 2 kids in the rain. That's all I needed to know." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "Most people wouldn't have cared." Jake leaned back in his chair. "Maybe the world needs more people who do." That sentence stayed with Lena. She'd spent so long fighting to be seen, to be heard, to be enough. And here was a man who never once asked for anything in return, only gave. Each day didn't come without its struggles, but the house felt lighter, fuller. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was the slow, quiet return of something they'd all lost. Family. It was a quiet Thursday night when Jake noticed something unusual. He was cleaning up after dinner, gathering scattered crayons and dishes left on the table by the kids, when he spotted a photograph sticking out of a notebook in Lena's open tote bag. He wasn't trying to pry, but the image caught his attention. Smiling man in a sleek black suit stood with Lena and the twins in front of a grand estate. The girls were younger, maybe toddlers, and the man had an unmistakable confidence about him. What struck Jake most was the silver frame around the photo. At the bottom corner was a small emblem, barely visible, but one Jake recognized from a news article not long ago. That night, after tucking Ethan and the girls into bed, Jake sat down with his laptop at the kitchen table. He couldn't shake the image from his mind. A few quick searches confirmed his suspicion. The man in the photo was Thomas Barrington, a powerful billionaire and founder of Barrington Global, a company often featured in financial news. Jake clicked through page after page until he landed on an obituary. Thomas had died in an accident almost 6 months ago, and there was only a brief mention of his surviving family, no names listed. Jake leaned back, stunned. Lena had said her husband died in a fire. Could it be the same man? The resemblance was undeniable. He checked the date on the article. It lined up. Jake's heart pounded as a wave of questions rushed through his mind. If Lena was Thomas Barrington's widow, why was she living like this? Why had she been thrown out, left to push a wheelchair in the pouring rain with 2 children? He wanted to ask her right then, but he couldn't. This wasn't about curiosity. This was about something bigger. Those girls weren't just anyone's children, they were part of a legacy, maybe even heirs. And yet here they were, sleeping in borrowed pajamas under his roof, unaware of any of it. Jake didn't sleep that night. He stayed at the kitchen table long after the house had gone quiet. He stared at the photo, at the smiling man who once stood proudly with his family, and made a silent promise. If there was any justice left in this world, he was going to find it for Lena, for Mia and Leela, and for the truth. 2 weeks after Jake sent the letter, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Jake stepped out of the garage, wiping his hands on a rag, surprised to see 2 sharply dressed men stepping out. One introduced himself as Mr. Hafford, a private investigator working for the Barrington family estate. They had received Jake's letter and were looking to speak with Lena. Jake hesitated, protective, but finally nodded and led them inside. Lena sat frozen at the table, her hands trembling as she listened. They asked for details about her marriage, the twins' birth certificates, even the fire that took Thomas's life. She answered everything clearly, though her voice cracked when speaking of Thomas. The men listened carefully, took copies of the documents Jake helped her gather, and left with promises to be in touch soon. Less than a week later, Lena received a call that left her speechless. She was to come to a law office in the city immediately. They would send a car. Jake offered to drive her himself, sensing how overwhelmed she felt. The kids stayed behind with a trusted neighbor while Jake and Lena made the trip in silence, tension thick in the air. The law firm was in a tall glass building, cold and sleek. Inside, an elderly man in a gray suit greeted them and introduced himself as the executor of Thomas Barrington's estate. He handed Lena a sealed envelope and gestured for her to open it. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter from Thomas, along with a revised copy of his will dated just weeks before his death. It named Lena as the sole guardian of the twins and the primary beneficiary of a multi-million-dollar trust. The will expressed his fears about his family disapproving of Lena and instructed that in the event of his death, she and the girls were to be protected and cared for. Lena couldn't hold back the tears. Years of struggle, rejection, and humiliation were swept away in an instant. She looked at Jake, her voice breaking as she whispered, "You did this." Jake shook his head gently. "No, I just made sure someone finally listened." In that quiet office, surrounded by strangers in suits, Lena felt the weight of the past begin to lift. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Months later, the once quiet life Jake had known looked very different. The old house still stood, with its creaky floors and chipped paint, but now it echoed with laughter and music. The sound of children playing filled the backyard every afternoon. The scent of fresh bread often drifted from the kitchen where Lena, now standing more confidently with a new lightweight wheelchair, rolled back and forth between counters, humming as she cooked. After receiving the inheritance, Lena could have bought anything as mansions, vacations, but her first decision surprised everyone. She used part of the money to purchase a large plot of land just outside of town and began building a community center for struggling families. She named it The Hearth, a place for single parents, widows, and anyone facing hard times to find support, resources, and shelter. She said it was her way of passing forward the kindness she had received when she needed it most. Jake took on a leadership role at the center, managing the grounds and organizing repair workshops. He taught teenagers how to fix bikes and cars, offering not just skills, but the same steady encouragement he once gave Ethan. The kids looked up to him, and the parents respected him. Everyone called him the heart of the place. Ethan, Mia, and Leela became inseparable, growing up more like siblings than friends. They walked to school together, built forts in the backyard, and whispered secrets under blankets during sleepovers. They didn't remember much about the pain they'd once carried. What they knew now was love, security, and joy. And somewhere in the middle of it all, something tender grew between Jake and Lena. It wasn't rushed or dramatic. It was quiet and natural, like two puzzle pieces that had always belonged together, but just hadn't met yet. One evening, while watching the children chase fireflies in the yard, Lena reached for Jake's hand. He didn't say anything, he just held it, and in that silence, everything was understood. People often said that Barrington fortune had changed Lena's life, but those who really knew her story knew the truth. It wasn't money that saved her. It was a stranger with grease on his hands and kindness in his heart who opened his door on a rainy night and reminded her that the world still had good people in it.